I've always been a curious person, and when my new neighbor moved in, I couldn't help but want to know more. But what I discovered went far beyond my wildest imaginations. Get ready for a story that will leave you breathless. I'd been living in this quiet little suburb for years, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business, whether you like it or not. My house was a modest two-story with a small garden out front, nothing fancy, but it was home. I'd gotten used to the rhythm of the place, the morning dog walkers, the kids racing bikes down the street, the same old faces at the corner store. So when the moving truck pulled up across the street one crisp autumn morning, it was hard not to notice. Change doesn't come often around here, and when it does, it's like a pebble in a still pond, ripples everywhere. I was sipping coffee on my porch, pretending to read the paper, when I saw him, Nick. He stepped out of a beat-up sedan, all lean muscle and easy confidence, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans that looked like they'd seen a few adventures. His hair was dark, a little messy, with streaks of grey at the temples that made him look distinguished, not old, maybe early 40s, like me. He carried a box labeled books with a kind of effortless strength, and when he glanced my way, our eyes met for a split second. My heart skipped a beat, no lie. It wasn't just that he was good-looking. There was something in his gaze, sharp and guarded, like he was sizing up the world and deciding how much of himself to share. I'm not the type to get flustered. I've been out since my 20s, lived through my share of heartbreak and hard-won lessons. But something about Nick made me feel like a teenager again, all nerves and possibility. I shook it off, told myself it was just the novelty of a new face. Still, I couldn't stop stealing glances as he moved boxes into the house. His movements precise but unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. Over the next few days, I pieced together bits about him from the neighborhood grapevine. Nick was single, no kids, worked remotely as some kind of consultant. Nobody was sure what kind. He kept to himself, polite but distant, offering a nod or a quick smile when he passed by. Mrs. Carter next door swore he was hiding something, but she thinks everyone's hiding something. Me. I was just curious, maybe too curious. One evening, I was out watering my garden when I saw him struggling with a flat tire on his sedan. He was crouched by the curb, tools scattered around, looking frustrated but determined. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed my toolbox and walked over. Need a hand? I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up, those sharp eyes locking onto mine again. You know your way around a tire. His voice was low, with a hint of a drawl I couldn't place. I've changed a few, I said, kneeling beside him. Name's David, by the way. Nick. He shook my hand, his grip firm. His hand warmed despite the chilly evening. Appreciate the help. We worked together in near silence, the kind that's comfortable when you're both focused on a task. Every now and then, our shoulders brushed, and I caught myself noticing the way his jaw tightened when he was concentrating, or the faint scar above his eyebrow that made me wonder about his story. When we finished, he stood and wiped his hands on his jeans, giving me a small, genuine smile. You're a lifesaver, David. Any time, I said, and I meant it. Maybe too much. That was the start of its more moments that grew into something more. We'd run into each other at the mailbox, exchange a few words about the weather or the neighborhood. He'd ask about my Jobim, a high school history teacher, and I'd ask about his, though he was vague, always steering the conversation. Elsewhere, there was a wall round him, not cold, just careful, like he'd been burned before and wasn't about to let it happen again. One night, I invited him over for a beer. It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, born out of loneliness and maybe a little hope. He hesitated, then said yes. We sat on my back porch, the air thick with the scent of jasmine, and talked about nothing and everything old movies. The best local pizza spots, the way the stars looked brighter out here than in the city. He laughed easily, but there was always that shadow in his eyes, like he was holding something back. You ever miss the city? I asked, taking a sip of my beer. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the sky. Sometimes, but I needed a change. Too many ghosts back there. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone told me to let it go. Instead, I told him about my own ghosts, my ex, Michael, who left after 5 years because he needed to find himself. Nick listened, really listened, his eyes softening in a way that made my chest ache. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Sounds like he didn't know what he had. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded, my heart doing that skipping thing again. We sat there until the night grew cool, and when he left, I felt the weight of his absence more than I cared to admit. Over the weeks, Nick started opening up, bit by bit. He'd drop by with coffee on Saturday mornings, or I'd find him tinkering in his garage and join him, passing tools and swapping stories. I learned he loved jazz, that he could quote entire scenes from The Godfather, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard and made me laugh harder than I had in years. But there were gaps in his stories, places where he'd pause and change the subject. I didn't push, though God knows I wanted to. One evening, we were walking back from the corner store, bags of groceries in hand, when he stopped suddenly, staring at a car parked across the street. It was nothing special, just a plain sedan, but his whole body tensed like a deer caught in headlights. You okay? I asked, my stomach twisting. He blinked, then forced a smile. Yeah, just. Thought I recognized it. But his voice was tight, and I knew he was lying. I didn't call him out, but it gnawed at me. What was he running from? And why did it feel like the closer we got, the more he was pulling away? By the time winter rolled around, I was in deep. I hadn't meant to fall for him, but Nick had a way of sneaking into your heart, his quiet strength, his rare smiles, the way he'd look at me like I was the only person in the room. We hadn't crossed any lines, hadn't even talked about it, but the air between us was charged, heavy with things unsaid. I wanted to tell him how I felt, but every time I got close, that shadow in his eyes stopped me. Whatever his secret was, it was big, and it was keeping us apart. One night, during a snowstorm, he showed up at my door, soaked and shivering, his face pale. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled him inside, wrapped him in a blanket, and made coffee while he sat on my couch, staring at the floor. "Nick, what's going on?" I asked, sitting beside him. "Talk to me." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling around the mug. "I haven't been honest with you, David, and you deserve better than that." My heart sank, but I nodded. "Okay, so tell me now." And that's when he started talking, his words slow and heavy, like they'd been locked away for too long. He told me about his life before, about a partner he'd loved, a man named Ryan, who'd been caught up in something dangerous, something Nick wouldn't explain. Ryan had died, and Nick had run, leaving everything behind to start over. "I didn't want to bring that here," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't want to bring it to you." I reached for his hand, my heart pounding. "You're not alone anymore, Nick. Whatever it is, We'll figure it out. He looked at me then, his eyes raw and unguarded for the first time. You don't know what you're signing up for. Maybe not, I said, squeezing his hand, but I'm willing to find out. That night, as the snow fell outside, something shifted between us. It wasn't a kiss or a confession, just a quiet understanding, a promise to face whatever came next together. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Nick's past wasn't done with him, and I had a feeling it was about to catch up. The weeks after Nick's confession were a strange mix of hope and unease. We were closer than ever, spending evenings cooking together, watching old movies, or just sitting on my porch, wrapped in blankets and talking about everything except the one thing that hung over Us's past. I tried to be patient, to give him space to share more when he was ready, but it was hard. Every time his phone buzzed, he'd flinch, and I'd catch him glancing out the window, like he was waiting for something to come crashing down. I wasn't naive. I knew whatever Nick was running from wasn't small. I'd catch glimpses of it in the way he locked his doors twice, the way he avoided certain topics, the way his smile would falter when he thought I wasn't looking. But I also saw the man he was trying to be, the one who'd leave me handwritten notes with bad puns, who'd help Mrs. Carter carry her groceries, who'd sit with me in silence when I had a rough day at work. That man was worth fighting for, and I wasn't about to let him go. One afternoon, I came home to find Nick in my driveway, pacing, his face drawn. "We need to talk," he said. Before I could even get out of my car, my stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" He led me inside, closing the door behind us like he was shutting out the world. "Someone's been watching the house," he said, his voice low. "I saw the same car again, the one from before. It's not a coincidence." I felt a chill, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay, who is it? What do they want?" He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the window. "It's complicated. Ryan, he was involved with some people. Bad people. I thought I'd gotten away, but..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I should have told you everything from the start." "Then tell me now," I said, stepping closer. "Nick, I'm not going anywhere, but I need to know what we're dealing with." He hesitated, then sat me down and told me the rest. Ryan had been a lawyer, but not the kind who works in a shiny office. He'd gotten mixed up with a criminal syndicate, helping them move money, thinking he could outsmart them. When things went south, Ryan paid the price, and Nick barely escaped with his life. He'd changed his name, moved across the country, built a new life. But now it seemed like they'd found him. "I don't know how they tracked me," he said, his voice raw. "But if they're here, it's not safe. Not for me, and not for you." I wanted to be angry, to yell at him for dragging me into this, but all I felt was fear, not for myself, but for him. I took his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. "We'll figure this out, Nick. Together." He shook his head, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "You're too stubborn for your own good, you know that." "Guilty," I said, managing a smile. "But you're stuck with me now. We made a plan." Nick would lay low, avoid drawing attention. I'd keep an eye out, report anything strange. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next few days were tense, every creak of the house or passing car setting us on edge. But we found comfort in the routine cooking dinner, watching the snow pile up outside, stealing quiet moments where we could pretend the world wasn't closing in. One night, after a long day, we were on the couch, a jazz record playing softly. In the background, Nick was quieter than usual, his head resting on my shoulder. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, almost too soft to hear. I tilted his chin up, my heart racing. "Don't say that. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." His eyes searched mine, and for the first time I saw no walls, no shadows, just Nick, raw and real. When he kissed me, it was slow and tentative, like he was afraid I'd vanish. I kissed him back, pouring everything I felt into it, every fear, every hope, every moment we'd shared. It wasn't a solution to our problems, but it was a start. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up to find a note on my kitchen table, Nick's handwriting scrawled across it. "I'm sorry. I have to fix this. Don't follow me." My heart stopped. His house was empty, his car gone. I called him, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to think. He'd run before, but this time, I wasn't letting him go without a fight. I spent the day piecing together Clues' old stories. The car he'd seen, the way he'd talked about Ryan. I reached out to an old friend from college, a cop who owed me a favor, and gave him what little I had. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get him digging. Hours later, he called me back, with a leader name, an address, a place Nick might have gone. I drove through the night, my hands shaking on the wheel, praying I wasn't too late. When I found him, he was in a rundown motel, his face bruised but alive. He tried to push me away, told me it was too dangerous, but I wasn't hearing it. "You don't get to decide that for me," I said, my voice breaking. "I love you, Nick, and I'm not letting you face this alone." He broke then, pulling me into his arms, his breath ragged against my neck. "I love you too," he whispered, and it was like the world stopped, just for a moment. We didn't have all the answers. The danger wasn't gone, and Nick's past was still a shadow we'd have to face. But as we stood there, holding on to each other in that dingy motel room, I knew we'd find a way. Together,